by an act or command of our will, we raise up a new idea, fix the mind on the contemplation of it, turn it on all sides, and at last dismiss it for some other idea. When we think that we have surveyed it with sufficient accuracy, I believe the same arguments will prove that even this command of the will gives us no real idea of force or energy. First, it must be allowed that when we know a power, we know that very circumstance in the cause by which it is enabled to produce the effect, for these are supposed to be synonymous. We must therefore know both the cause and effect and the relation between them. But do we pretend to be acquainted with the nature of the human soul and the nature of an idea or the aptitude of the one to produce the other? This is a real creation, a production of something out of nothing, which implies a power so great that it may seem, at first sight, beyond the reach of any being less than infinite. At least it must be owned that such a power is not felt, nor known, nor even conceivable by the mind. We only feel the event, namely the existence of an idea, consequent to a command of the will. Hmm. But the manner in which this operation is performed, the power by which it is produced, is entirely beyond our comprehension. Secondly, the command of the mind over itself is limited, as well as its command over the body, and these limits are not known by reason or by acquaintance with the nature of cause and effect, but only by experience and observation, as in all other natural events and in the operation of external objects. Our authority over our sentiments and passions is much weaker than over our ideas, and even the latter authority is circumscribed within very narrow boundaries. Will anyone pretend to assign the ultimate reason of these boundaries, or show why the power is deficient in one case, not in another? Thirdly, this self-command is very different at different times. A man in health possesses more of it than one languishing with sickness. We are more master of our thoughts in the morning than in the evening, fasting than after a full meal. Ah. Can we give any reason for these variations except experience? Where then is the power of which we pretend to be conscious? Is there not here, either in a spiritual or material substance or both, some secret mechanism or structure of parts upon which the effect depends, and which, being entirely unknown to us, renders the power or energy of the will equally unknowable and incomprehensible? Volition is surely an act of the mind, with which we are sufficiently acquainted. Reflect upon it. Consider it on all sides. Do you find anything in it, this creative power, by which it raises from nothing a new idea, and with it a kind of fiat, imitates the omnipotence of its maker? If I may be allowed so to speak, who called forth into being all the various sins of nature? So far from being conscious of this energy in the will, it requires as certain experience as that of which we are possessed to convince us that such extraordinary effects do ever result from a simple act of volition. The generality of mankind never find any difficulty in accounting for the more common and familiar operations of nature, such as the descent of heavy bodies, the growth of plants, the generation of animals, or the nourishment of bodies by food. But suppose that in all these cases they perceive the very force or energy of the cause by which it is connected with its effect, and is ever infallible in its operation. They acquire, by long habit, such a turn of mind that, upon the appearance of the cause, they immediately expect the assurance of its usual attendant, and hardly conceive it possible that any other event could result from it. It is only the discovery of extraordinary phenomena, such as earthquakes, pestilence, and prodigies of any kind, that they find themselves at a loss to assign a proper cause and find the manner in which the effect is produced by it. It is usual for men, in such difficulties, to have recourse to some invisible intelligent principle as the immediate cause of the event, which surprises them and which they think cannot be accounted for from the common powers of nature. But philosophers, who carry their scrutiny a little further, immediately perceive that even in the most familiar events, the energy of the cause is as unintelligible as in the most unusual, and that we only learn by experience the frequent conjunction of objects, without being ever able to comprehend anything like connection between them. Here then, many philosophers think themselves obliged to reason, to have recourse on all occasions to the same principles, to the same principle which the vulgar never appeal to, but in cases they appear miraculous and supernatural. They acknowledge mind and intelligence to be not only the ultimate and original cause of all things, but the immediate and sole cause of every event which appears in nature. They pretend those objects, which are commonly denominated causes, are in reality nothing more but occasions, and the true and direct principle of every effect is not the power, force in nature, but evolution of the supreme being who wills that such particular objects should forever be conjoined with each other. Instead of saying that the billiard ball moves another by a force which it has derived from the author of nature, it is the deity himself, they say, who has a particular evolution, moves the second ball being determined to this operation by the impulse of the first ball, in consequence of those general laws which he has laid down to himself in the government of the universe. But philosophers advancing still in their inquiries, discover that, as we are totally ignorant of the power on which depends the mutual operation of bodies, we are no less ignorant of the power on which depends the operation of mind on body or of body on mind, nor are we able, either from our senses or consciousness, to assign the ultimate principle in one case more than in the other. The same ignorance, therefore, reduces them to the same conclusion. They assert that the deity is the immediate cause of the union between soul and body, that they are not the organs of sense which, being agitated by external forces, produce sensations of the mind, but that it is a particular volition of our omnipotent maker which excites such a sensation in consequence of such emotion in the organ. In like manner, it is not any energy in the will which produces locomotion in our members. It is God Himself who is pleased to second our will in itself impotent, and to command that motion which we erroneously attribute to our own power and efficacy. Nor do philosophers stop at this conclusion. They sometimes extend the same inference to the mind itself and its internal operations. Our mental vision or conception of ideas is nothing but a revelation made to us by our Maker. When we voluntarily turn our thoughts to any object and raise up its image in the fancy, it is not the will which creates the idea. It is the universal creator who discovers it to the mind and renders it present to us. Thus, according to these philosophers, everything is full of God, not content with the principle that nothing exists but by his will, that nothing possesses any power but by his concession, they rob nature and all created beings of every power in order to render their dependence on the deity still more sensible and immediate. They consider not that, by this theory, they diminish instead of magnifying the grandeur of these attributes which they affect so much to celebrate. It argues surely more power in the deity to delegate a certain degree of power to inferior creatures than to produce everything by his own immediate volition. It argues more wisdom to contrive at first the fabric of the world with such perfect foresight that, of itself, and by its proper operation, it may serve all the purposes of providence, that if the great Creator were obliged every moment to adjust its parts and animate by his breath all the wheels of that stupendous machine. But if we should have a more philosophical confutation of this theory, perhaps the two following reflections may suffice. First, it seems to me that this theory of the universal energy and operation of the Supreme Being is too bold ever to carry conviction with it to a man sufficiently apprised of the weakness of human reason and the narrow limits to which it is confined in all its operations. Though the chain of arguments which conduct to it were ever so logical, there must arise a strong suspicion, if not an absolute assurance, that it has carried us quite beyond the reach of our faculties when it leads to conclusions so extraordinary and so remote from common life and experience. We are got into fairyland long ere we have reached the last steps of our theory, and there we have no reason to trust our common methods of argument, or to think that our usual analogies and probabilities have any authority. Our line is too short to fathom such immense abysses. And however we may flatter ourselves that we are guided in every step which we take by a kind of verisimilitude and experience, we may be assured that this fancied experience has no authority when we thus apply it to subjects that lie entirely out of the sphere of experience. From this we shall have occasion to touch afterwards. Secondly, I cannot perceive any force in the arguments on which this theory is founded. We are ignorant, it is true, of the manner in which bodies operate on each other. Their force or energy is entirely incomprehensible. Oh, but are we not equally ignorant of the manner of force by which a mind, even the supreme mind, operates either on itself or on body? Whence, I beseech you, do we acquire any idea of it? We have no sentiment or consciousness of this power in ourselves. We have no idea of the supreme being but what we learn from reflection on our own faculties. Were our ignorance, therefore, a good reason for rejecting anything, we should be led into that principle of denying all energy in the Supreme Being as much as in the grossest matter. We surely comprehend as little the operations of one as of the other. It is more difficult to conceive that motion may arise from impulse than it may arise from volition. All we know is our profound ignorance in both cases. Part 2. But to hasten to a conclusion of this argument, which is already drawn out to too great a length, we have sought in vain for an idea of power or necessary connection in all the sources from which we could suppose it to be derived. It appears that, in single instances of the operation of bodies, we never can, by our utmost scrutiny, discover anything but one event following another, without being able to comprehend any force or power by which the cause operates, or any connection between it and its supposed effect. The same difficulty occurs in contemplating the operations of mind on body, where we observe the motion of the latter to follow upon the volition of the former, but are not able to observe or conceive the tie which binds together the motion and volition, or the energy by which the mind produces this effect. The authority of the will over its own faculties and ideas is not a whit more comprehensible, so that, upon the whole, there appears not throughout all nature any one instance of connection which is conceivable by us. All events seem entirely loose and separate. One event follows another, but we never can observe any tie between them. They seem conjoined, but never connected. As we can have no idea of anything which never appeared to our outside sense or inward sentiment, the necessary conclusion seems to be that we have no idea of connection or power at all, and that these words are absolutely without any meaning when employed in philosophical reasonings or common life. But there still remains one method of avoiding this conclusion, one source which we have not yet examined. When any natural object or event is presented, it is impossible for us, by any sagacity or penetration, to discover or even conjecture without experience what event will result from it, or to carry our foresight beyond this event, which is immediately present to the memory and senses. Even after one instance or experiment, where we've observed a particular event to follow upon another, we are not entitled to form a general rule or foretell what will happen in like cases, it being justly esteemed an unpardonable temerity to judge of the whole course of nature from one single experiment, however accurate or certain. From one particular species of event has always, in all instances, been conjoined with another, we make no longer any scruple of foretelling one upon the appearance of the other, and of employing that reasoning which can alone assure us of any matter of fact or existence. We then call the one object cause, the other effect. We suppose that there is some connection between them, some power in the one, by which it infallibly produces the other, and operates with the greatest certainty and strongest necessity. It appears then that this idea of a necessary connection among events arises from a number of similar instances which occur, of the constant conjunction of these events, nor can that idea ever be suggested by any one of these instances, surveyed all in possible lights and positions. But there is nothing in a number of instances different from every single instance, which is supposed to be exactly similar, except that, after a repetition of similar instances, the mind is carried by habit upon the appearance of one event to expect its usual attendant and to believe that it will exist. This connection, therefore, which we feel in the mind, this customary translation of the imagination from one object to its usual attendant, is a sentiment or impression from which we form the idea or power of necessary connection. Nothing further is in the case. Contemplate the subject on all sides. You will never find any other origin of that idea. It is the sole difference between one instance from which we can never receive the idea of connection, and a number of similar instances by which it is suggested. The first time a man saw the communication of motion by impulse, as by the shook of two billiard balls, he could not pronounce what that one event connected, only that it was conjoined with the other. After he has observed several instances of this nature, he then pronounces them to be connected. What alteration has happened to give rise to this new idea of connection? Nothing, but that he now feels these events to be connected in his imagination and can readily foretell the existence of one from the appearance of the other. When we say, therefore, that one object is connected with another, we mean only that they have acquired a connection in our thought and give rise to this inference by which they become proofs of each other's existence, a conclusion which is somewhat extraordinary, but which seems founded on sufficient evidence. Nor will its evidence be weakened by any general diffidence of the understanding or skeptical suspicion concerning every conclusion which is new and extraordinary. No conclusions can be more agreeable to skepticism than such as make discoveries concerning the weakness and narrow limits of human reason and capacity. And what strong instance can be produced of the surprising ignorance and weakness of the understanding than the present? For surely, if there be any relation among objects, where it imports to us to know perfectly, it is that of cause and effect. On, on this are founded all our reasonings concerning matter of factor existence. By means of it alone, we attain any assurance concerning objects, which are removed from the present testimony of our memory and senses. The only immediate utility of all sciences is to teach us how to control and regulate future events by their causes. Our thoughts and inquiries are, therefore, every moment employed about this relation. Yet so imperfect are the ideas which we form concerning it that it is impossible to give any definition of cause except what is drawn from something extraneous and foreign to it. Similar objects are always conjoined with similar. Of this we have experience. Suitably to this experience, therefore, we define a cause to be an object followed by another, and where all the objects similar to the first are followed by objects similar to the second. Or, in other words, where if the first object had not been, Lord, the second never had existed. The appearance of a cause always conveys the mind by a customary transition of the idea of the effect. Of this also we have experience. We may therefore suitably to this experience form another definition of cause and call it an object followed by another, and whose appearance always conveys the thought to that other. But though both these definitions be drawn from circumstances foreign to the cause, we cannot readily remedy this inconvenience or attain any more perfect definition which may point out that circumstance in the cause which gives it a connection with its effect. We have no idea of this connection, nor even any distinct notion what it is we desire to know when we endeavor at a conception of it. We say, for instance, that the vibration of this string is the cause of this particular sound. But what do we mean by that affirmation? We either mean that this vibration is followed by this sound, and that all similar vibrations have been followed by similar sounds, or that this vibration is followed by this sound, and that upon the appearance of one, the mind anticipates the senses and forms immediately an idea of the other. We may consider the relation of cause and effect in either of these two lights, but beyond this, we have no idea of it. To recapitulate, therefore, the reasonings of this section, every idea is copied from some preceding impression or sentiment, and where we find any impression, we may be certain that there is no idea. In all single instances of the operation of bodies or minds, there is nothing that produces any impression, nor consequently can suggest any idea of power or necessary connection. But when many uniform instances appear, and the same object is always followed by the same event, we then begin to entertain the notion of cause and connection. We then feel a new sentiment or impression, to wit, a customary connection and the thought or imagination between one object and its usual attendant. This connection is the original of the idea which we seek for. For as this idea arises from a number of similar instances, and not from any single instance, it must arise from that circumstance in which the number of instances differ from every individual instance. But this customary connection or transition of the imagination is the only circumstance in which they differ. In every other particular, they are alike. The first instance, which we saw of motion, communicated by the shock of two billiard balls, to return to this obvious illustration, is exactly similar to any instance that may, at present, occur to us, except only that we could not at first infer one event from the other, which we are not enabled to do at present after so long a course of uniform experience. I know not whether the reader will readily apprehend this reasoning. I am afraid that, should I multiply words about it, or throw it into a greater variety of lights, it will only become more obscure and intricate. In all abstract reasonings, there is one point of view which, if we can happily hit, we shall go further towards illustrating the subject, and by all the eloquence and copious expression in the world. This point of view we should endeavor to reach and reserve the flowers of rhetoric for subjects which are more adapted to them. 8. Of liberty and necessity. It might reasonably be expected in questions which have been canvassed and disputed with great eagerness since the first origin of science and philosophy, the meaning of all the terms, at least, should have been agreed upon among the disputants, and our inquiries in the course of 2,000 years been able to pass from words to the true and real subject of the controversy. For how easy it may seem to give exact definitions of the terms employed in reasoning, and make these definitions not the mere sound of words, the object of future scrutiny and examination. But if we consider the matter more narrowly, we shall be apt to draw a quite opposite conclusion. From this circumstance alone, that a controversy has been long kept on foot and remains still undecided, we may presume that there is some ambiguity in the expression that all disputants affix different ideas to the terms employed in the controversy. For as the faculties of the mind are supposed to be naturally alike in every individual, otherwise nothing could be more fruitless than to reason or dispute together. It were impossible, if men affix the same ideas to their terms, that they could so long form different opinions of the same subject, especially when they communicate their views, and each party turn themselves on all sides in search of arguments, and which give them the victory over their antagonists. It is true, if men attempt the discussion of questions which lie entirely beyond the reach of human capacity, such as those concerning the origin of worlds, or the economy of their intellectual system, or region of spirits, and they long beat the air in their fruitless contests, and never arrive at any determinate conclusion. And if the question regard any subject of common life and experience, nothing, one would think, could preserve the dispute so long undecided, but some ambiguous expressions which keep the antagonists still at a distance and hinder them from grappling with each other. This has been the case in the long disputed question concerning liberty and necessity, and to so remarkable a degree that I be not much mistaken, we shall find that all mankind, both learned and ignorant, have always been of the same opinion with regard to this subject, that in few intelligible definitions would immediately have put an end to the whole controversy. I own that this dispute has been so much canvassed on all hands, has led philosophers into a labyrinth of obscure sophistry, that it is no wonder if a sensible reader indulge his ease so far as to turn a deaf ear to the proposal of such a question from which he can expect neither instruction nor entertainment. The state of the argument here proposed may, perhaps, serve to renew his attention. It has more novelty, promises at least some decision of the controversy, and will not much disturb his ease by any intricate, obscure reasoning. I hope, therefore, to make it appear that all men have ever agreed in the doctrine both of necessity and of liberty, according to any reasonable sense which can be put on these terms, and that the whole controversy has hitherto turned merely upon words. We shall begin with examining the doctrine of necessity. It is universally allowed that matter in all its operations is accurately as a necessary force, that every natural effect is so precisely determined by the energy of its cause, and no other effect in such particular circumstances would possibly have resulted from it. The degree of direction of every motion is, by the laws of nature, prescribed with such exactness that a living creature may as soon arise from the shallow of two bodies as motion in any other degree or direction than what is actually produced by it. Would we, therefore, from a just and precise idea of necessity, would we therefore form a just and precise idea of necessity, we must consider whence that idea arises when we apply it to the operation of bodies. It seems evident that in all the senses of nature, if all the senses of nature were continually shifted in such a manner that no two events bore any resemblance to each other, every object was entirely new without any similitude whatever had been seen before, or should never, in that case, have attained the least idea of necessity or of a connection among these objects. We might say, upon such a supposition, that one object or event has followed another, not that one was produced by another. The relation of cause and effect must be utterly unknown to mankind. Inference and reasoning concerning the operations of nature would, from that moment, be at an end, and the memory and senses remain the only canals by which the knowledge of any real existence would possibly have access to the mind. Our idea, therefore, of necessity and causation arises entirely from the uniformity observed in the operations of nature, where similar objects are constantly conjoined together. The mind is determined by custom to infer the one from the appearance of the other. These two circumstances, observable, form the whole of that necessity which we ascribe to matter. Beyond the constant conjunction of similar objects and the constant inference from one to the other, we have no notion of any necessity or connection. If it appear, therefore, that all mankind have ever allowed, without any doubt or hesitation, that these two circumstances take place in the voluntary actions of men and in the operations of mind, it must follow that all mankind ever agreed in the doctrine of necessity, that all mankind have ever agreed in the doctrine of necessity, and that they have hitherto disputed, merely not for understanding each other. As for the first circumstance, the constant and regular conjunction of similar events, we may possibly satisfy ourselves by the following considerations. It is universally acknowledged that there is a great uniformity among the actions of men in all nations and ages, and that human nature remains still the same in its principles and operations. The same motives always produce the same actions. The same events follow from the same causes. Ambition, avarice, self-love, vanity, friendship, generosity, public spirit, these passions mixed in various degrees and distributed throughout society have been from the beginning of the world and still are the source of all actions and enterprises which have ever been observed among mankind. Would you know the sentiments, inclinations, and course of life of the Greeks and Romans? Study well the temper and actions of the French and English. You cannot be much mistaken in transferring the former most of the observations which have been made with regard to the latter. Mankind are so much the same in all times and places that history informs us of nothing new or strange in this particular. Its chief use is only to discover the constant and universal principle of human nature by shewing in all various of circumstances and situations, in all varieties of circumstances and situations and furnishings with all materials from which we may form our observations and become acquainted with the regular springs of human action and behavior. These records of wars, intrigues, factions, and revolutions are so many collections of experiments by which the politician or moral philosopher fixes the principles of his science in the same manner any physician, as a physician or natural philosopher becomes acquainted with the nature of plants, minerals, or any other external objects by the experiments which he forms concerning them. Nor are the earth, water, or any other elements examined by Aristotle or Hippocrates more like to those which at present lie under the observation than by men described by Polybius and Tacitus are to those who govern the world. Should a traveler returning from a faraway country bring us an account of men wholly different from any with whom we ever acquainted, men who were entirely divested of avarice, ambition, or revenge, and knew no pleasure but friendship, generosity, and public spirit, should immediately, from these circumstances, detect the falsehood and prove him a liar with the same certainty as if he had stuffed his narration with stories of counters and dragons, miracles, and prodigies. If we explored any forgery in history, we cannot make use of a more convincing argument than to prove that the actions ascribed to any person are directly contrary to the course of nature, and that no human motives in such circumstances would ever induce him to such a conduct. The veracity of Quintus Curtius, who is as much to be suspected when he describes the supernatural courage of Alexander, by which he was hurried on singly to attack multitudes, as when he describes his supernatural force and activity by which he was able to resist them. So readily and universally do we acknowledge a uniformity in human motives and actions as well as in the operations of body. Hence, likewise, the benefit of that experience acquired by long life and a variety of business and company in order to instruct us in the principles of human nature and regulate our future conduct, as well as speculation. By means of this guide, we mount up the knowledge of men's inclinations and motives from their actions, expressions, and even gestures, and again, descend to the interpretation of their actions from our knowledge of their motives and inclinations. The general observations treasured up by a course of experience give us the clue of human nature and teach us to unravel all its intricacies. Pretexts and appearances no longer deceive us. Public declarations pass for the spacious coloring of a cause, and though virtue and honor are allowed their proper weight and authority, that perfect disinterestedness, so often pretended to, is ever expected in multitudes and parties, seldom in their leaders, and scarcely even in the individuals of any rank or station. When there is no uniformity in human actions, and wherever every experiment which we could form of this kind, irregular and anomalous, uh, which we could form of this kind, irregular and anomalous, it were impossible to collect any general observations concerning mankind, and no experience, however accurately digested by reflection, would ever serve to any purpose. Why is the aged husbandman more skillful in his calling, and the young beginner? Because there is a certain uniformity in the operation of the sun, rain, and earth towards the production of vegetables, and experience teaches the old practitioner the rules by which this operation is governed and directed. We must not, however, expect that this uniformity of human actions should be carried to such a length as that all men, in the same circumstances, will always act precisely in the same manner, without making any allowance for the diversity of characters, prejudices, and opinions. Such uniformity in every particular is found in no part of nature. On the contrary, from observing the variety of conduct in different men, we are able to form a greater variety of maxims. We still suppose a degree of uniformity and regularity. Are the manners of men different in all ages and countries? We learn thence the great force of custom and education, which mold the human mind from its infancy and form it into a fixed and established character. Is the behavior and conduct of one sex very unlike that of the other? It is thence we become acquainted with different characters which nature has impressed upon the sexes, and which she preserves with constancy and regularity. Are the actions of the same person much diversified in the different periods of his life, from infancy to old age? This affords room for any general observations concerning the gradual change of our sentiments and inclinations, and the different maxims which prevail in the different ages of human creatures. Even the characters which are peculiar to each individual have a uniformity in their influence, otherwise, our acquaintance with the persons and our observation of their conduct could teach us their dispositions to serve to direct our behavior with regard to them. I grant it possible to find some actions which seem to have no regular connection with any known motives, and are exceptions to all the measures of conduct which have ever been established for the government of men. If we would willingly know what judgment should be formed of such regular and extraordinary circumstances, we may consider the sentiments commonly entertained with regard to those irregular events which appear in the course of nature, the operations of external objects. All causes are not conjoined to their usual effects with like uniformity. An artificer who handles only dead matter may be disappointed of his aim, as well as a politician who directs the conduct of sensible and intelligent agents. The vulgar, who take things according to their first appearance, attribute the uncertainty of events to such an uncertainty in the causes as makes the latter often fail of their usual influence, though they meet with no impediment in their operation. But philosophers observing that almost in every part of nature there is contained a vast variety of springs and principles which are hid by reason of their minuteness or remoteness, find that it is at least possible the contrariety of events may not proceed from any contingency in cause, but from the secret operation of contrary causes, from a contingency in the cause. This probability is converted into certainty by further observation on the remark that, upon an exact scrutiny, a contrariety of effects always betrays a contrariety of causes and proceeds from their mutual opposition. A peasant can give no better reason for the stopping of any clock or watch and to say that it does not commonly go right. If an artist easily perceives that the same force in the spring or pendulum has always done the same influence on the wheels, but fails of its usual effect, perhaps by reason of a grain of dust, will put which puts a stop on the whole movement. From the observation of several parallel instances, philosophers form a maxim that the connection between all causes and effects is equally necessary, and that its seeming uncertainty in some instances proceeds from the secret opposition of contrary causes. Thus, for instance, in the human body, when the usual symptoms of health or sickness disappoint our expectation, when medicines operate not with their wonted powers, when irregular events follow from any particular cause, the philosopher and physician are not surprised at the matter, nor are ever tempted to deny in general the necessity and uniformity of those principles by which the animal economy is conducted. They know the human body is a mighty complicated machine, that many secret powers lurk in it which are altogether beyond our comprehension, that to us it must often appear very uncertain in its operations, that therefore the regular events which outwardly discover themselves can be no proof that the laws of nature are not observed with the greatest regularity in its internal operations and government. The philosopher, if he is consistent, must apply the same reasoning to the actions and volitions of intelligent agents. The most irregular and unexpected resolutions of men may frequently be accounted for by those who know this very particular circumstance of their character and situation. A person of unobliging disposition gives a peevish answer, but he has the tooth he has the toothache or has not dined. A stupid fellow discovers an uncommon alacrity in his carriage, but he has met with but he has met with a sudden piece of good fortune. Or even when an action, as sometimes happens, cannot be particularly accounted for either by the person themselves or by others, we know in general that the characters of men are, to a certain degree, inconstant and irregular. That is, in a manner, the constant character of human nature, though it be applicable in a more particular manner to some persons who have no fixed rule of their conduct, but proceed in a continued course of caprice and inconstancy. The internal principles and motives may operate in a uniform manner, notwithstanding these seeming irregularities, in the same manner as the winds, rain, clouds, and other variations of the weather are supposed to be governed by steady principles, though not easily discoverable by human sagacity and inquiry. Thus it appears, not only that the conjunction between motives and voluntary actions is as regular and uniform as that between the cause and effect in any part of nature, but also that this regular conjunction has been universally acknowledged among mankind and has never been the subject of dispute, either in philosophy or common life. Now, as it is from past experience that we draw all inferences concerning the future, and as we conclude that objects will always be conjoined together, which we find to have always been conjoined, it may seem superfluous to prove that this experienced uniformity in human actions is a source once we draw inferences concerning them. But in order to throw the argument into a greater variety of lights, we shall also insist, though briefly, on this latter topic. The mutual dependence of men is so great in all societies that scarce any human action is entirely complete in itself, or is performed without some reference to the actions of others, which are requisite to make it answer fully the intention of the agent. The poorest magistrate, to ensure him the enjoyment of the fruits of his labor, the poorest artificer who labors alone expects at least the protection of the magistrate to ensure him the enjoyment of the fruits of his labor. He also expects that when he carries his goods to the market and offers them at a reasonable price, he shall find purchasers, shall be able, by the money he requires, to engage others to supply him with those commodities which are requisite for his subsistence. In proportion as men extend their dealings and render their intercourse with others more complicated, They, they always comprehend in their schemes of life a greater variety of voluntary actions, which they expect from the proper motives to cooperate with their own. In all these conclusions, they take their measures from past experience in the same manner as their reasonings concerning external objects, and firmly believe that men, as well as all the elements, are to continue in their operation the same as they have ever found them. A manufacturer reckons upon the labor of his servants for the execution of any work as much as upon the tools which he employs, and would be equally surprised were his expectations disappointed. In short, his experimental inference and reasoning concerning the actions of others enters so much into human life that no man while awake is ever a moment without employing it. Have we not a reason, therefore, to affirm that all mankind have always agreed in the doctrine of necessity, according to the foregoing definition and explication of it? Nor have philosophers ever entertained different opinion from the people in this particular. For not to mention that almost every action in their life supposes that option, that opinion. There are few Nor have philosophers ever entertained a different opinion from the people in this particular. For not to mention that almost every action of their life supposes that opinion, there are even few of the speculative parts of learning to which it is not essential. What would become of history had we not a dependence on the veracity of the historian according to the experience which we have had of mankind? How could politics be a science if laws and forms of government had not a uniform influence upon society? Where would be the foundations of morals, the foundation of morals, if particular characters had no certain or determinate power to produce particular sentiments, if these sentiments had no constant operation on actions? And with what pretense could we employ our criticism upon any poet or polite author if we could not pronounce the conduct and sentiments of his actions, whether natural or unnatural, to such characters and such circumstances? It seems almost impossible, therefore, to engage either in science or action of any kind without acknowledging the doctrine of necessity and this inference from motives to voluntary actions, from characters to conduct. And indeed, when we consider how aptly natural and moral evidence link together and form only one chain of argument, we shall make no scruple to allow that they are of the same nature and derived from the same principles. A prisoner who has neither money nor interest discovers the impossibility of his escape, as well as when he considers the obstinacy of the gaoler as the walls and bars with which he is surrounded, and in all attempts for his freedom, chooses rather to work upon the stone and iron of the one than upon the inflexible nature of the other. The same prisoner, when conducted to fidelity by the guards, sorry, the same prisoner, when conducted to the scaffold, foresees his death as certain from the constancy and fidelity of the guards, as from the operation of the axe or wheel. His mind runs along a certain train of ideas. The refusal of the soldiers consent to his escape, the action of the executioner, the separation of the head and the body, bleeding, convulsive motions, and death. Here is a connected chain of natural causes and voluntary actions, but the mind feels no difference between them in passing from one link to another, nor is less certain of the future event than if it were connected with the objects present to the memory or senses by a train of causes cemented together by what we are pleased to call physical necessity. The same experience union has the same effect on the mind, whether the united objects be motives, volition, and actions, or figure and motion. We may change the names of things, but their nature and their operation on the understanding never change. Were a man whom I know to be honest and opulent, and with whom I live in intimate friendship, to come into my house, where I am surrounded with my servants, I rest assured that he is not to stab me before he leaves, in order to rob me of my silver standish. And I no more suspect this event than the falling of the house itself, which is new and solidly built and founded. But he may have been seized with a certain and unknown frenzy. So may a certain earthquake arise and shake and tumble my house about my ears. I shall therefore change the suppositions. I shall say that I know with certainty that he is not to put his hand into the fire and hold it there till it be consumed. And this event, I think I can foretell with the same assurance as that if he throw himself out at the window, and meet with no obstruction, he will not remain a moment suspended in the air. No suspicion of any unknown frenzy can give the least possibility to the former event, which is so contrary to all the known principles of human nature. A man who at noon leaves his purse full of gold on the pavement at Charing Cross may as well expect that it will fly away like a feather as that he will find it untouched an hour later. Above one half of human reasonings contain inferences of a similar nature, attended with more or less degrees of certainty, proportioned to our experience of the usual conduct of mankind in particular situations. I have frequently considered what could possibly be the reason why all mankind, though they have ever, without hesitation, acknowledged the doctrine of necessity in their whole practice and reasoning, have yet discovered such a reluctance to acknowledge it in words, have rather shown propensity in all ages to profess the contrary opinion. The matter, I think, may be accounted for after the following matter. If we examine, if we if we examine the operations of body and the production of effects from their causes, we shall find that all our faculties can never carry us further in our knowledge of this relation than barely to observe that the particular objects are constantly conjoined together, that the mind is carried by a customary transition from the appearance of one to the belief of the other. But though this conclusion concerning human ignorance be the result of the strictest scrutiny of this subject, men still entertain a strong propensity to believe that they penetrate further into the powers of nature and perceive something like a necessary connection between the cause and effect. When again they turn their reflections towards the operations of their own minds, they feel no such connection of the motive and the action. They are thence apt to suppose that there is a difference between the effects which result from material force and those which arise from a thought and intelligence.